Yeah. This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. CNN Center right now is just beginning to work on this story.
Something devastating has happened, and again, unconfirmed report that a plane has crashed into one of the towers there. We are efforting more information on this subject as it becomes available to you.
Something's coming out.
The day that it happened, I dropped off 2 children at daycare. I was on my way, after I did that, I was on my way to the UMass library. I had to pick up a couple of things from interlibrary loan. I remember that. I was finishing up my dissertation at the time. So that's what happened that morning, right? I dropped my kids off and was on my way to UMass to hit the library. And the one thing that was a little bit weird about it is I mean, you know Zach, right? I'm a current events junkie, right? So always sort of like listening to the news and stuff. And a friend of mine had made me I think it was a cassette tape of like all these Bruce Springsteen stuff, these songs and stuff, and I used to give her a hard time, like, oh, I couldn't stand Bruce and stuff. You know, I was sort of a punk rocker and stuff, and, you know, I'm not listening to Springsteen, but she had given me this tape, and so I was actually listening to that, so I didn't hear anything. So I go do the stuff at UMass, come home, and, you know, I turn on the television and go into the kitchen in this condo that we were living at the time, and I saw there was like 18 messages on my answering machine. I'm like, what the hell is this, right? I mean, you know, what the hell's going on? And so, like, the TV sort of comes up at that point, and you know, I always have CNN on in the background, and I sort of like look at the TV while I'm sort of like playing the answer machine, and you know, I sort of see something had happened, but didn't really sort of pay attention, and was like listening to the messages, and you know, had a couple Louine's brothers and sisters lived in Manhattan, and so a lot of them were just sort of like checking in, saying that they were all right and stuff. And you know, one brother, Shane, you know, worked downtown, you know, got caught up in the big cloud and stuff, and you know, so yeah, I mean, there was a lot of like messages there, and I'm still like, you know, what the, you know, everyone's all right, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Everyone's all right. I mean, what the hell happened, right? So then I like go in the other room and sort of watched. You know, the coverage and stuff, and then it was clear like what had happened. In terms of like the impact, you know, it was interesting. Louine was working at Travelers. They sent everyone home. She came home, and then, you know, it basically sort of you know, became like a key part of everyone's life for weeks, right? Sort of watching this. You know, I had always I had heard of Bin Laden before that. Didn't, you know, hadn't thought it through, like who did it, wasn't like really paying attention that day. But in some ways, you know, there clearly had been a dance really between, you know, the United States and that organization.
On 9/11, I don't remember what grade I was in, but I remember taking the wrong bus home and having my mom was throwing a fit at the time, which wasn't helping, because as soon as I didn't really know what was going on. I was kind of oblivious to what was going on until I watched the actual news broadcast. Since then, like I'd never flown a plane, and I never wanted to fly a plane after that. So that's that.
Okay. And has it impacted your life at all?
Not really.
Okay.
I know my cousin was like in the area where it was going on, so he was like
really?
really close.
Okay.
But I was glad that he came back right as they were broadcasting it, so like everyone
wow.
like had a sigh of relief.
So he wasn't stuck in New York. He was able to get home.
No, he wasn't stuck in New York. He was able to get out nice and safely. I'm thankful for that.
Well, I remember where I was when it happened, just like you do with the Challenger and all of the events. I'm almost too young to remember JFK, but you just remember where you were and what was going on, and what a tragedy it was. And we kind of stopped work to watch the TV and the news and everything. So I remember it happening. To say that it's impacted my life, it hasn't really impacted my life to the point where I know that some people are very apprehensive and nervous. Much more about security and things in the country. I wouldn't say that it's affected me that way, but it has to the point that the people that I know whose lives were impacted by it. We know some people who lost family members. One of our family members lost a husband.
I remember that day. I was at work, and it was a beautiful day. And I remember I was at my computer, and I remember hearing that a plane had hit one of the trade centers, and then another one, and then the Pentagon, and it just seemed like something drastic was happening, something that had never happened before. It was a very scary feeling for the next several days because they stopped plane flight in the air, and it just seemed very quiet. And I also remember driving down the street and always looking over my shoulder for about a week or two.
I remember of 9/11. So I was new in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I went to parochial school. And I had started serving as the school announcer in the mornings.
All right.
And so just read, birthdays that were coming up and things that had to do around the school. And it was our first period class, and I was sitting there being bored, and someone came in and said a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And initially I didn't think anything of it. Right. I thought, oh, it's some kind of passenger, like a little rinky-dinky plane, some pilot screwed up and just went into there, and they wouldn't stop talking about it, and I was kind of annoyed actually.
Right.
And more reports started coming in, and it was indicative that it was actually a jumbo jet.
Right.
And so I ran to the school office because I knew the secretaries and the principal, being the announcer, and they had a broadcast on, and we were on the radio, and so we were listening as it was going on. And then upstairs in the computer lab, they actually started broadcasting, I think CNN or someone that had a live feed.
Right.
And so I got to see the second tower go down live.
Oh, wow.
Which was kind of terrifying. I mean, it was very, very, very scary.
Right.
And then the whole school was in shock, and we got out early, and through the front doors of the school, you could see this huge plume of smoke coming from Manhattan that just hung there for a week or two after.
On 9/11, I was in first grade, and I was 5 years old, and my brother was 6. So my parents thought that we were too young to know about it, so I actually wasn't told until 2002. After the fact, I remember my dad sitting me and my brother down in front of our old desktop computer and showing us the video of the towers and the people running, and I remember seeing people screaming. And in my head, it was like a really big deal, and I remember going to school the next day thinking that everyone would be in a panic, but everyone seemed pretty calm at the time because it didn't happen the day before. It happened a year ago. And I think that my parents made the better choice in keeping it from me as a kid for that year, because I think that I was always scared as a kid, and I think that it was good to kind of protect us because we were younger from the idea, and it was such a horrible day that I'd almost prefer, not being told.
I don't know if it could have been prevented. I don't know what kind of intelligence the government had. So at the time, there had never really been anything like that. I do feel safer today. I believe there are a lot of things that the government knows that they don't share with the public, so the public isn't scared. But I do believe there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that we don't know that make the United States a safer place to live in since then.
In terms of prevention, I think at the time, there was warnings that there was a threat, if you will, particularly on New York City and the Twin Towers. But I don't think the infrastructure was there to kind of protect America. I mean, the post, if you will, 9/11 world was a whole different world in terms of security checks, if you will, doing the kind of due diligence to make sure that, there wasn't a threat on the United States. So in terms of the infrastructure of preventing it, I don't think the infrastructure was there in terms of kind of like security checks, the kind of overzealous, if you will, checking of bags and etc., or, of getting on a plane. I just don't think that the infrastructure was there. But, I mean, I think America did, have warnings that, it could be an attack. But again, in the post 9/11 world, those things, if you will, kind of seem far-fetched.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that came out of the attack was that, basically, we're good at preparing for the last attack. That I think a similar thing, using the airliners the way they did, that's probably fairly remote that could happen. But I think the difficulty is anticipating, okay, what's the next, what would the next means be, that they could figure out how to launch an attack. So I mean, I feel pretty comfortable. The airline thing is pretty well secured, but what the next threat might be, that's, the minds that thought up the airliner thing had really worked hard and thought it out.
Could the attack have been prevented? Of course it could have been prevented, right? But the answer in some ways is, of course not, right? I mean, we didn't think it was going to happen, right? So, especially at how wild that attack was, right? I mean, it would have been difficult to predict that, jet airliners are going to be used as a bomb, right? Which is what they were. So no one, that was obviously novel, right? In terms though of, blowback, right? I mean, we know what the American government was doing in that part of the world, and if you actually look at, the 4 things that bin Laden put on the table, right, when he declared a fatwa against the United States. I used to know this stuff, right? I mean, I think he said 4 things about why he declared war on the United States, right, which, wasn't put out under the name of Al-Qaeda, right, which, is basically an American invention.
I think that the government reacted too quickly without knowing what they were getting themselves into. And I think the past 15 years, we didn't really get anything accomplished. So I feel like we're kind of just staying at the same pace.
It's kind of like the Cold War, where it's kind of hard to go to war against an ideology. And here we are. This is like a hot ideological war, but like it's not really doing much, I don't really think.
So, I mean, would you say your viewpoint was the same 15 years ago about war? Has it changed through war? What?
I mean, I'd say it's about the same. It's more so just the fact that 15 years ago I was just little and kind of indifferent about the whole thing. Since I don't really have any personal family members inside of war, I can't really personally connect to it on a empathy level, but like I could like sympathize with those people, I suppose. So it's not good that we're at war for 15 years and kind of knowing everything. It doesn't seem like it's accomplished too much.
to be quite honest, I don't really follow political science events as closely as I should. So with regard to the war and what's going on the outskirts of the United States, I know we spend an immense amount of money there. I don't know how successful it is. I don't know how much of it is to help the other countries versus to protect the United States. So I really can't speak too much to that. But I do believe the boundaries of the United States are fairly safe. There's always going to be certain sporadic events here and there. I don't know if we could fully stop that, but I do feel that the United States is a safe place to live.
I believe that, Americans will acknowledge 9/11, but I wonder about the kind of Disneyfication, if you will, of 9/11. I often tell my students that, Black Friday is our new national holiday, right? It's, and so, I just don't want to ever see special 9/11 sales or something or people kind of using it for, to fuel the kind of economic engine. But I think that Americans will acknowledge it, but I really think that 9/11 should be about solutions and not just about acknowledgement. Solutions to having better relations with other foreign powers, solutions, if you will, for better relations in the Middle East and bringing peace, if you will, to that region of the world. So I'm not really worried about America remembering. I'm worried about America working towards solution.
I think it'll be like Pearl Harbor. I think we won't ever forget it. We still talk about, at least in my high school and in my classes that I've had in college, we still talk about Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And I think we'll always talk about September 11th. Whether or not its relevance is still around 70 years from now when we're all old people is a different story. But I don't think it's going to be something we ever forget. There's only been 2 serious ones, and that we don't talk about the van bombing.
Yeah.
But we talk about planes when things actually blow up.
See, a lot of people didn't know about what happened previous to 9/11, how the vans
91.
drove out under there and hoping to explode right under both towers and ultimately destroy it. So that attack could have happened in 91. It just wasn't successful.
Well, my issue with that is they went, hey, this happened in 91, and outside of putting extra police force and men in and around the buildings, there was nothing done to prevent it from happening again. Right. And if you know that you pissed off someone enough to make them drive a van bomb under your building, what's going to stop them from doing something else?
Well, from the demographics of people that experienced it, I think it's certainly something that's memorable. I personally couldn't forget if I wanted to. Now, there is a demographic of people that were 4 years old when that happened, or hadn't been born when that happened.
Right.
And they're being told about these things in a historical context. And so, in the same, do kids today know what Vietnam was, or Korea, or the Bay of Pigs? Right. All these things are things that come up in history class, but they aren't necessarily something that's in living memory. There is now the memorial site at Freedom Tower, I think it's called.
Yeah, I was just recently there on a trip. Very, very educational.
I should turn that off. This whole time. And I've seen Freedom Tower from afar. I haven't been to the memorial itself yet.
The memorial it's great.
And you went into the basement and
saw everything, and the tour guides told stories, and it's almost like you were there living it. I mean, as unfortunate as that might be, but the tour guides there put you into the eyes of what it was like for a lot of people there, and it was really beneficial to a lot, I think. So you believe that it'll be a good part of history and it won't fade away?
Well, having that memorial site there will certainly be beneficial to it. I do remember even within 2 years after the events of walking around the city and seeing tourists leaving flowers at makeshift memorial sites and things like that, and having a sort of like New York reaction to it, you know, it's like, oh, these tourists kind of thing. It's like, that was 2 years ago, so long. It certainly should be taught, because it's very responsible for the world that we live in today.